Today on The State of Us, an honest conversation with the LGBTQ and straight communities. Better and worse, what it's like to be a queer teen today. That's the headline of an article in the New York Times national section, and it sparked a conversation for us here at True Chat. So welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal, and the senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson.
If you work with young people, this is a big issue. And parents and adults are sticking their head in it and making it an issue as well, which is why we need to have an honest, open discussion, which, not to start with our ending, but that's what our mission statement is here. And so while we know going into it, we may upset some people or offend some people even, that is not what we're trying to do. We are trying to get a topic that is being talked about in certain circles to be talked about more openly, because my belief is the more you can get people to discuss an issue, the more people learn and the more accepting we become of one another.
So what we're going to do today, originally the plan was just to cover this article and kind of talk about it from a young person's perspective, but we are fortunate on The State of Us, or at least today, to have three people from three different generations in the room, and at least two different sexual identities. So from that standpoint, it's complicated. You know, it is complicated because I think there's a lot of folks out there, and I'm sure we have plenty of listeners, who the preference might be to be respectful, but it can be difficult to make sense of how to be respectful, whether you're in the LGBTQ community or not. So what we're going to do today is kind of open it up. We're going to give a little background on the three of us that are participating in the conversation, but then we're going to open it up to sort of here's what we're seeing going on today for young people. Here's how it's better. Here's how it's worse. And then also talk some about what are questions that some of the folks in the straight community might have that they don't always ask or are afraid to ask because they don't want to offend somebody, or maybe they've assumed that they know the answer and they don't. So that's kind of, I guess, what it is. Everybody's setting out, like the title suggests, this is an honest conversation. We're going to try to live up to the goal of being respectful today, although I think we can all acknowledge from the onset that we'll probably fall short in some respect, because somebody somewhere listening probably won't find what we say to be respectful, but we are setting out with that intention. We're not attempting to be offensive or, be disrespectful to anybody. So it's also an opportunity for our listeners, I think, to engage as well. So the other person joining us for our conversation is Levi LaForge, and he's an intern with us right now, an associate recording producer. Levi is a member of Gen Z. Then you've got myself, a millennial, and we've got our resident boomer, Mr. Lance Jackson. So
Here.
Yes, here, present. So before we go any further, this isn't usually how we'd start a show, but I think it's an important starting point for this show of our listeners, and having transparency with them. So Levi, is it reasonable, fair to say that you identify as straight? And here's one that Levi had a question on: cisgender. Do you know what that means now, Levi? Are you able to tell listeners?
It's somebody who's straight and they haven't changed their identity in any way.
A gender description of when someone's sex that they were assigned at birth and their gender identity correspond in the expected way. For example, someone who is assigned male at birth and identifies as a man. Okay. So in other words, you were assigned male at birth, and that is how you see yourself as a male. So, so that makes you a straight cisgender man.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That'd be that fun technical terminology for it. And a member of Gen Z, right?
Yep.
And going to a high school in a semi-urban, semi-rural type setting. And then we have our resident boomer, who we know, folks, from previous shows, absolutely loves labels. Anytime, that's why his title is so long at the beginning of the show, is because of how much he loves labels. I think
what's that word, Levi, that Justin's now using, or he's not using the word, but he's acting that way. We talked about it earlier. He's
the vocab word of the day
for a couple days ago. Starts with an F. He's being facetious. Yeah, I don't really like labels. I hate labels. I hate labeling people.
For our listeners, that. But if we were
if you're a new listener, I don't like labels. Why can't we all just be people? Why can't you be a human? I be a human, and we just go on from there and don't worry about it.
Like the song, "Why Can't We Be Friends?"
Why can't we be friends?
So
that's what I try to do. I just try to be friendly.
I think. But again, this is an opportunity to correct otherwise. Lance, is it fair to say that the description that we used for Levi minus the Gen Z bit would be an accurate description of yourself?
Yeah, is this where I can inflect some humor?
Sure.
Except it's not real. Some people might find it offensive.
Oh, well, some people may have already found something that we said offensive.
Well, that's true. I've always, within this realm of when all of this came about, and I don't do it to make myself better than anybody else. But how do you describe me? I am a raging heterosexual. That's what I say. Okay. I'm a male and I am totally attracted to women. Not that that's good, bad, or indifferent. Doesn't make me better or worse than anybody else.
Just what you've been cursed with.
But that's what I have been given at birth. That's what I do.
That's
okay. That's within being totally honest. The woman that I'm married to is the only person that I've ever had sexual relations with, and we waited until after we've been married,
which puts you in a minority.
I found that out.
Of living adults, anyway.
At least in a 2006 study that was done.
A pretty substantive minority, actually.
Yeah, it was not only 5% of Americans
could say the same.
Are married in 2006 could say that. So, and again, I don't say that to say, see, I'm better than you or I'm worse than you. That's just being honest. That's just where I am. I've never cheated on my wife. I've never wanted to. But what am I attracted to? Females.
By the standard of having maintain a monogamous relationship, sexual relationship with only one person
for 40 years,
and that person being the one that you are in fact married to, that is a very tiny group of the population, of the living.
So maybe
living population.
So maybe I don't have I don't have the proper place to speak from. I don't know.
Well,
because I don't have that experience that it seems like, I knew where I was going. I know where I was going now. One of the first things that I said 20 years ago was, because the big question at that point in time for high school kids was, and for society, is it a choice or is it something you were given at birth? And all I could say was from my perspective, because I can't speak for other people.
Right.
I don't ever remember making a conscious decision. I'm going to like those people and those people don't interest me. It was never a conscious decision, And then as we would discuss it with high school kids, who you would be amazed are a lot more open-minded than most of their parents, in my time in the classroom, than their parents give them credit for. They know more about what's going on, and they're a lot more open-minded and curious to know what's going on. And the question that always came up, who would choose to be a part of a group that was going to be antagonized and looked down upon or belittled or attacked? Air quotes here. God wouldn't make anybody that way because that's not what it says in the book, right? So therefore, if you are not heterosexual, that was the big argument 20 years ago, you must be choosing to do this. And my high school kids, 90% of them said, that makes no sense to us why you would choose to be a part of a group that 20 years ago was really, really being looked down upon, even more so than today.
Why would you Why would you enlist in something that will get you bullied and ridiculed?
And we know from the turn of the century or from the start of, well, not always, because sometimes there are societies where this was not looked down upon at all. So very powerful societies. Yeah. If you want to bring the history person, me, into this, and talk about this, for most of the 20th century in the United States, if you felt that way, you kept it hidden because it was so dangerous for somebody to find out if you felt that way.
So that leaves us, we got to describe Levi and Lance, and that leaves us with me. Well, let's ask Levi, do you have any idea how I identify? And not that you should. I'm not saying that you should.
How you do?
Yeah.
You identify as a man, I believe, right?
Uh-huh.
As a man.
Yep. So cisgender.
Was that what was he born that way?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
As far to my knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, yeah, I'll see, but very good, Levi. That's, but to my knowledge, yes, but you don't know for sure. Yes. So one thing in the room, right, as we continue the conversation, it's important that everybody know that all three people in the room are cisgender, right? Which means that we all identify with the sex that we were assigned at birth. Okay. What about sexual orientation identification?
Well, as far as I know, you're bisexual.
And that would be fair to say, yes. Bisexual is by the way, folks, we're referencing, they call it their quick reference guide from the Cancer Network, which is a nonprofit organization that does what it sounds like, which is it creates a lot of material for all manner of healthcare providers who serve cancer patients. And of course, one of the things that they find is that it's very important for anybody who's working with cancer patients because of all of the things that go into that, especially the emotional toll, that people be well informed and have access to good information. So they created this sheet as a thing to give as a tool to providers and healthcare professionals or anybody who was wondering, what they could use in the way of terms. So that's what we're referencing for this. And they define bisexual as a person who experiences attraction to some people of their gender and another gender. Bisexual attraction does not have to be equally split or indicate a level of interest that is the same across the genders as an individual may be attracted to. Often, bisexual is interchangeably used with pansexual. So here's one where I get to, I guess, I don't know, show age or show naivety or something. But when I was growing up, and I was in high school, I had never even heard the term pansexual. Like I probably didn't encounter it maybe until I was like 20 or 21. So I had known that I was attracted to more than one gender for a long time, but I didn't know that there was a term, that there was another term other than bisexual for that. So to answer your question, I don't mind if people, because when I came out and explained to people, my identity, I told them I was bisexual because that's all, that was the only thing that I knew was like an option to explain it. So it wasn't that like, oh, I don't think that this one explains it. It's that I didn't even know the term. I didn't even know it was a word. Pansexual is a person who can experience sexual, romantic, physical, and or spiritual attraction for members of any gender identity or expression.
Okay, but see, that opens up that whole spiritual thing.
Oh, yeah.
Because there are guys that I've been very close to, and I'm not romantically interested or physically interested in them. Mm-hmm. But in my mind, what spiritual means, I would say that there was a spiritual bond between us. Mm-hmm.
So I guess
so. Now what does that do to what I said 10 minutes ago?
It's up to you what it does to what you said 10 minutes ago,
Then why, if that's true, then why don't we let that be for everybody? Why do we have to make it an issue?
Yeah.
If I'm allowed to feel any way that I need to feel and describe anything that I feel any way I want to describe it, why don't then we as people allow everybody else the same opportunity?
We're going to try to answer that question. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. there's a lot of challenging things about the conversation that we're having, but I think that one of the most complicated and difficult for people to come to terms with is that no set of definitions, not even the one that we're using, could be representative of how everybody defines those terms. And I think part of the challenge with that is that the LGBTQ community as a community has disagreed about how some of them are defined. And not to be difficult and not to be mean, just because when you have a minority group that had to live or felt they had to live in the shadows for so long, it becomes very difficult for there to ever have been from the get-go a common terminology. It's just, that's challenging because they didn't exist.
Because you weren't allowed to talk about it,
right,
or act on it in public.
Yeah, you wouldn't talk.
So everything was done.
There wasn't literature,
back room, back alley kind of deals.
Yeah, and that means that the only way that most of that stuff was spread was one of two ways: either through straight literature, in which case people not part of the community decided what terms to use, or
they labeled people.
Right, they labeled people, they labeled other people, or it was word of mouth within the community. And we all know how any game of telephone works, right? Which is that by the time it gets around the circle and back, it's changed a little bit from where it started. One of the things that's a big one, Levi wanted to know about the word queer, right? And I mean, this article from the New York Times, Better and Worse, What It's Like to Be a Queer Teen Today. For some people, it might be a bit uncomfortable to see queer teen in
a major newspaper
newspaper headline. Honestly, the thought that I had when Lance handed me this to look at was, I guess the reclamation of the term really is underway, because if the New York Times, if an editor at the New York Times was comfortable with, allowing it to be published as part of the title, then clearly, that is in process. So do you have an idea, Levi? Do you want to tell us what you think queer means or what you believe it to mean?
Well, queer, most of my life, I believe to be a derogatory term. So I used to think it's always a term to use negatively towards people associating in that community. But not ever in my close friend group. I have friends that are members of the LGBTQ community, and I'm completely okay with that. But there's never been usually a situation where I would ever need to call them queer, or they wanted me to call them queer.
Pretty good. So two definitions here. One is an adjective, okay? And the adjective is an umbrella term to describe individuals who don't identify as straight and or cisgender. Right. So very, very simply,
a very broad-based definition.
A very broad term, which is part of its appeal. And generally, it is accepted that the Q in LGBTQ refers to either questioning or queer, or perhaps both, depending on who you ask. But in recent years, what has happened is some, and this is another key point, members of the community have decided that the movement to reclaim it as a term, much like, for example, within, the African-American community reclaiming the N-word and it being okay within the community to use it, would not be acceptable, obviously, for, not that people listening would know, but not, I'm white, so I definitely wouldn't refer to that community that way. But that's the point here of it's similar in that the thinking is we're going to reclaim it.
Well, reclaim it as what then?
As an umbrella term for anyone who is not cisgender and straight.
So is it okay for somebody like me to use that, since I'm not a member of the community? If the community is trying to reclaim it for themselves,
that's a very good question.
Am I allowed to use it to describe people or not? Because I too am not Black or African American or whatever,
and you wouldn't use,
and I wouldn't use the N-word, right?
Yeah.
Am I allowed to use the Q word being from the heterosexual community without offending someone within the LGBTQ community?
I think
or does it depend on who I'm talking to?
Well, because we're going to get to another one as well that I think is a little more clean cut. This one is a little murky in that, for example, the New York Times uses it as part of a.
Well, but the New York,
I
read the Sunday New York Times every week as part of working on this show.
Right.
It's used in multiple articles.
Yes.
This time it's used
It's used in a headline.
And talking to high school age students.
Yes.
But it's used multiple times every week in the New York Times Sunday edition when talking about adults.
What I would tell people,
because they're describing either themselves or the author is trying to describe that person. And so here comes the question from the old guy, right? Is what are they talking about? When I read that word, what am I supposed to do? I know when it says Pacific Islander, or when it says white American, or when it says Southern Baptist, or whatever. I know what that means, right? So if I'm reading it on a weekly basis in the New York Times, what's my mind supposed to do? What am I supposed to picture? Because obviously it's being used as a descriptor.
You're supposed to picture, I guess, somebody who is not a member of the cisgender heterosexual community. That would be the only thing you can really know.
It really doesn't paint a clear picture.
No. And that's kind of the point, I think, of the term as well.
And is that what
so the answer to
you've called them the community. Is that what the community wants it to be?
To answer the question, I think this is for me, this is a situational one in that I do not refer to the LGBT community as the queer community on any kind of regular basis. Partly because when I was growing up, queer was still a pretty active slur that was used against me, and people that I knew. So even though, do I agree with the notion of reclaiming it? Yes, that still makes it difficult to do, though. You know what I mean? To embrace.
Because it was directed towards you as a negative term.
Now, me using the word is also different than somebody else using it, So what I would tell people is that if you're questioning whether or not to use it, it's always going to be safe to use LGBTQ. So I would use LGBTQ and just avoid the potential of talking to somebody who they might not be upset with you because they don't think you're trying to be offensive, but it may be a difficult thing for them. They may not want to hear it, or they may not want it used that way. So I would just say it's simple. There's something else you can use that's not going to.
I'm going to go down the rabbit hole though here.
Okay.
As an English person, as a person who uses language.
Yes.
If you don't allow people to use the word,
then you give it power, which is the notion of reclamation. And
right.
I get the argument.
Okay. All right.
And I think the Times
I really don't care.
Yeah.
Because as I said, I don't know if I said it here or off air. I don't care. I just want everybody to care about one another.
Why can't we be friends?
And not hurt one another, right?
Yeah.
I don't
Yep.
purposely ever mean to hurt another human being. And I know I have, because we all do, but that's never been my intention. And that's what I'm trying to understand today. You know what I'm saying? Is that I want to do the right thing. I also want to do what's the best thing for the community to get more people to feel like I do.
Right.
And that is, let's just be accepting of whatever. Because I don't care if anybody accepts who I am, but I don't have to worry about it because I'm part of the majority.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's not fair for me to say, well, it doesn't matter to me whether people accept me or not. Well, they automatically do because I'm part of the majority. Right. So that's not a fair argument on my part. But why
it's difficult to know if the acceptance would be important if you weren't part of that group.
Well, and would they accept me if I wasn't part of the majority?
Right.
By definition, if you're part of the majority, you're accepted because you are the largest number of that group. But what's it going to take Here's another question that none of us can answer. But what's it going to take for us to get there?
To not go further down the rabbit hole, the whole thing of feeling and choice being one and the same. There's a lot of debate, right? Forget this whole argument altogether, but in the field of psychology about, do any of us choose to feel a certain way? No, our feelings come about whether or not we choose them. Now, can we choose to take action to feel a different way? Yes, generally, but that doesn't mean that it's something that you snap and you like, somebody just died and I'm sad. I'm going to choose to be happy. And then bam, I'm no longer sad. Well, sure, it'd be nice if it worked that way, but that's not how it works, right? It's a process. Let's continue the conversation. We have some stats about young people, how it's better and worse today. And both are true. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. Where we left off at the end of the last segment was talking about the notion of should, and I actually Googled this question because I was kind of interested to see, what Google might tell us. If you're a straight person, is it okay to talk about the queer, and I'm using air quotes here, community, right? Or the LGBTQ community, if we're going to use those interchangeably? I guess I am hopeful that it gets to a point where it is. I think that it's probably still best that if your goal is just to be respectful and it doesn't make a difference to you, to probably use LGBTQ as your terminology. Because again, that's not going to offend somebody, or carries, I suppose, the least likelihood of offending somebody. The other one, and this is, I guess important to talk about because you kind of asked, queer was used as a slur, can still be, it's less common, I guess, as a slur. The big one, that a lot of people know is the F word. And that one it only has one definition. It is a derogatory term referring to a gay person or someone perceived as queer. While often used derogatorily, it is also used in a reclaimed sense by some gay people, usually gay men, as a positive in-group only term. This is the closest thing to the N-word in the LGBTQ community. It would not be, you would be hard pressed probably to find somebody in the community who would be comfortable with somebody not in the community, or even people in the community, using that word to describe them. I can also say that I have one friend where we will use that word back and forth with each other who is in the community, and we're okay with that, but that is a very finite, little tiny, exclusive sort of thing. Young people today, over the 2000s and 2010s, more young people openly identified as gay, lesbian, or bisexual. So in 2008, it sat at about 6% or so, or a little under 6%. And by the most recent data, about 2020 or so, it sits somewhere around 12.5%. So more people openly identify as as gay, lesbian, or bisexual. It's only covering those three. Fewer LGBTQ students reported harassment in school. So there's an improvement there. It was at about 40% in 2005. It's down to about 21% today. So it's almost halved. More young people said they supported gay marriage. So this was a survey of adults ages 18 to 34. And they were asked in 2005, do you support gay marriage? And it stood somewhere right at about 50%, just a little north of that. Today, it stands at about 80%. So substantive change there. And of course, if you track the increase in acceptance, it's pretty much plateaued and stayed almost about the same since shortly after the Supreme Court decision in 2016.
And I would say anecdotally, starting to talk about it in 2000, in this urban community in a rural county in a red county politically, I would say is about right.
Yeah.
Is that, it was all with young people, it was about, right around 50% in 2000. And then when I retired in 2015, that number was largely more than 3 out of 4.
Right.
And then the year after I retired was when the Supreme Court decision came out. And I think that shows, boy, we always say, right, and I'm not to get us off track here, but the Supreme Court is supposed to stand on its own. But how much does the Supreme Court really make decisions off of public opinion? Because it took them to 2016 to make that. And by that time, 8 out of 10 Americans in the age group of 18 to 35 said they were okay with it.
So a recent survey by the New York Times and Morning Consult of 1,574 young adults found that people ages 18 to 28, who mostly graduated from high school since 2013, were significantly more likely to know LGBTQ students in school than those a decade older, who were teenagers in the 2000s. The younger group was twice as likely to report knowing at least one transgender student and 3 times as likely to have known 3 or more. 4 in 10 said they knew numerous gay, lesbian, or bisexual people in high school, compared with a quarter of the older group. And while both groups reported hearing the words gay and queer used negatively at similar rates, a data point reflected in interviews with teenagers who say they still hear "that's so gay" in school hallways, the younger graduates were significantly more likely to hear those words used in a positive light as well. Some people start using it and really don't think about the context
or have no clue
what it means right. Or where it comes from.
Like the teacher graded something really
right.
hard and the kids would say, "Well, that was gay."
Yeah.
That he graded that so hard.
Right.
And it's like, but then that's where the teaching needs to be done.
Right.
In a positive manner of that's not what you want to say.
Right.
You can say that wasn't fair.
Yeah.
That wasn't, there are all other kinds of words you
right.
can use. You probably shouldn't use that word. But again, and I don't know because I'm not there, okay? But it would seem like there are some places, some schools where you're not even allowed to bring that up as the teacher.
Yeah.
Now,
mm-hmm.
because there's been a backlash. So here I am trying to describe, hey, don't use that because that's offensive to somebody. And now there are parental groups out there saying, well, you can't talk about that with my child.
Yeah.
I want to say, wait a minute. Do you want us to let them call your child this name or that? Well, no.
Yeah.
Whoa. So you want your child protected, but you don't want to protect all children?
It's that whole notion of more rights for others means less rights for me.
There are people out there trying to silence the discussions that have been taking place for the last 5 to 10 years. The discussions were taking place.
Right.
And those of us who want the discussions to take place would say growth was happening. Mm-hmm. And now there are people that are fearful of the growth, and so they're trying to stop the discussion. Fair?
Yep. I think that is
which is why we need to have this show, is because we as all people of the human race need to be able to discuss things so that we're not offensively or openly hurting other individuals of our species.
Well, and in just fairness, it hitting home, the Colorado Springs nightclub shooting. I was in Colorado Springs,
and you were going
and I was going to go
to the place where the shooting
on the night it happened, and just lucky fate, whatever you want to call it. 20 minutes prior to when we were going to arrive,
getting in the car to go to that place,
we decided that we weren't going to go, that we were tired and going to go home instead. But it was on the plan to go, and that's been a real thing since then. Like in my household, that's been contentious about, like, it's sort of like reclaiming a term, right? But in a more real sort of hit home way of, you could say that to stay safe, the answer is, well, then you can't go to places like that because you're not safe if you go. I mean, you're less safe. that's that whole, are you not safe, less safe, what? But the real thing was, and that was a discussion that my husband and I had this year of whether or not I was going to go to Pride was a big safety thing of, but if you don't go, then are you letting the people win that are trying to stop that anyway?
And my family members that have had that same discussion this year, whereas before it wasn't an issue.
I think there's a feeling of a little bit of retraction and reversal in the direction that things were going in terms of the willingness of people to act violently against people just living their life. So,
which was my point. It's like we were moving there and we were
yes.
like becoming more accepting as a society, and that created a backlash.
Right.
Because people got scared, like, oh my gosh, this is going to become acceptable. And so their lack of knowledge led them to attack and lead this revolt, which is too bad. But unfortunately, that's the way things go.
Yep. Well, it's the pendulum started to swing, right, in a new direction. We started to trend as a society in a new direction. There's bound to be setbacks along the way, and I think this is one of them that's being dealt with.
But we have to keep discussing it and
right.
And
the answer is not to stop talking about it. That's definitely not the answer.
Because then it lets the people who want to silence it win.
Right.
They get their way, and the abuse starts all over again.
Yep.
And we don't want to regress.
Exactly.
As a society.
Hopefully not.
Towards the abuse towards any people, right?
Right.
We don't want to be abused. We don't want to be put down. So why should we say it's okay to put down any other group of people?
Yep.
That, to me, it's that simple. I don't.
It should be.
I don't understand the complexity. I really don't.
Why do we have this conversation today, Lance?
Well, because at True Chat, we have a mission, and our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And that's why we did it, because this was a tough one to have. And boy, there's probably 100 other things that we wanted to cover in today's show and ran out of time. But you know us, we're going to tell you what we think. And hopefully you listened all the way to the end, and you'll tell your family and friends about it. And they'll want to listen because they know that they're going to get the straight stuff from us. And tell them as a podcast, they can find this show on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us releases new episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays first thing in the morning as a podcast. Those same episodes are available on AM and FM radio stations on the weekends across the United States and parts of Canada. For The State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our associate producer, Levi LaForge, and senior producer, Bradley Butch. And of course, our audience, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.